All right, let's get right into it. We're going to unlock one of the most incredible books in all of history. And what's so wild is that it wasn't written for us. In fact, it was never even meant to be a book. And yet, it survived for almost 2,000 years. We are, of course, talking about the Meditations by the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius.
So get this picture in your head. The most powerful man on the planet isn't kicking back in a fancy palace in Rome. No way. He's huddled in a military tent on the cold, grim frontier of the empire, literally surrounded by war. And this quote just nails it, doesn't it? This isn't a book of philosophy. It's his personal journal, his way of coping with all that pressure and loneliness.
Which, leads to this fascinating question. When the guy in charge of pretty much the entire known world sits down to write, all alone, for his eyes only, what does he say? What is he so worried about? What truths is he trying to figure out? That's the big mystery we're going to try to unpack here. Okay, first things first. We have to understand the man and the absolutely chaotic world he was living in. Because for Marcus, writing in this journal wasn't some kind of hobby. It was a lifeline. It was a tool for survival. I mean, just look at this timeline. The moment he becomes emperor, bam! The empire gets slammed with a massive plague, then floods, then famine, then war. For nearly 20 years, he's not living in Rome. He's on the front lines leading the army. He dies in a military camp. So yeah, that's the constant crisis he's dealing with while writing these notes to himself. And here's something you've got to get straight right away. The Meditations isn't a book like you and I think of one. It was his private journal, kind of like a mental scrapbook. Just a jumble of random thoughts, quotes he liked, and little reminders to himself. There's no structure, which is why you can just open it to any page and find something amazing. And that rawness, that lack of polish, that's what makes it so real. So to really get what he's doing in this journal, we have to do a little mental time travel. We have to totally reset what we think the word philosophy even means, because back then it was something completely different. I mean, look at this. The difference is night and day. Today, when you hear philosophy, you probably think of dusty books and college classrooms, right? Super abstract stuff. But back in the ancient world, nope. It was a toolkit. It was a practical, hands-on guide for how to live a good life. It was about what you did, not just what you thought. See, the official Roman religion, that was all about public stuff. Big ceremonies to keep the gods happy and make sure the empire was safe. But it didn't really have answers for your personal struggles or big moral questions. For that kind of guidance, for ethics, for purpose, for how to be a good person, the educated Romans turned to philosophy. And the philosophy that Marcus chose, his personal guide, was Stoicism. You can literally think of it as the operating system running in his head to help him deal with all that chaos. So now, let's take a look at the code. The Stoics had this great way of explaining it using a farming analogy. I love this. Logic, that's your fence. It protects your mind from bad ideas and fuzzy thinking. Physics, that's the soil itself, your basic understanding of how the universe works. And ethics, well, that's the whole point. That's the crop you're trying to grow, a good, virtuous life. And check this out. The guy who started Stoicism, Zeno, he had this brilliant metaphor using just his hand. So an idea or an observation comes to you, that's an open hand. You decide, okay, I'll consider this. You start to close your hand. You use your reason to really test it. That's a clenched fist. And true, solid knowledge, that's when you grab that fist with your other hand. It's unshakable. It's all about not jumping to conclusions. All right, so let's talk about the soil, their idea of the universe. The Stoics believed everything, and I mean everything, was part of one single interconnected living thing. And it was all guided by this rational divine intelligence, a mind fire they called God or nature. So God wasn't some guy in the sky. God was the universe, and everything that happened was part of its rational plan. And that brings us to the main goal in Stoicism, which is living according to nature. Now hold on, that doesn't mean you have to go build a log cabin. It means living according to reason. Why? Because the Stoics believed our ability to reason is our little piece of that divine rational fire that runs the cosmos. So when you live rationally, you're living in harmony with the universe itself. And this right here, this is probably the most famous and useful part of Stoicism. It's this incredibly simple but life-changing idea. You have to separate what you can control from what you can't. Things like your health, your money, what other people think of you, you don't ultimately control those. But your own judgments, your own opinions, your choice to do the right thing, those are 100% yours. And that's where you should put all your energy. Okay, so now we're going to pivot a little because this is where the story takes a really unexpected turn. These ideas from a so-called pagan philosophy, well, they didn't just disappear. They ended up becoming the secret foundation for something huge that would shape the entire Western world. And get this, many of the core ideas in early Christian theology were actually built on a Stoic blueprint. You have to remember, the first Christian thinkers, they didn't just invent everything out of thin air. They were educated men, and their education was steeped in Greek and Roman philosophy, especially Stoicism. So they used the tools they had. Let me give you some specifics. The Stoic idea of the logos, this divine reason that orders the universe, well, that was adapted right into the concept of the Word in the Gospel of John. The Stoic pneuma, this sort of creative fire or spirit, it's a clear precursor to the Holy Spirit. Even the words monks use, monastery, ascetic, those were borrowed straight from the language of philosophy. And this quote about Saint Ambrose, one of the giants of the early church, just says it all. Quote, "The voice is the voice of a Christian bishop, but the precepts are those of Zeno." In other words, he's talking like a Christian leader, but the ideas he's teaching, pure Stoicism. The philosophical DNA is just, it's right there. So after all that, let's bring it back to the man himself, back to Marcus Aurelius and his little journal. Why do we still read this thing 2,000 years later? What's the magic here that keeps it so relevant? I think the secret is just how human he is. He's not some perfect, wise sage on a mountaintop with no emotions. No, he's a real person, and you can feel him struggling on the page. He gets frustrated, he doubts himself, and he's constantly reminding himself to be better. He's not a master with all the answers. He's a student, just like us. And here's a little detail that I think tells you everything you need to know about his character. When he writes something good about someone in his journal, he uses their name. But if he has to criticize someone, he never writes down their name. It's always just he or they. Think about that. Even in his own private notes that no one was ever supposed to see, he was still practicing kindness. And really, that's the heart of it. That's the enduring power of this book. It's not a manual for how to be perfect. It's a testament to the struggle. It's the honest record of a good but flawed person trying his absolute best to get through an incredibly hard life with some grace. And what's more timeless or more relatable than that? So I'll just leave you with this final thought. Marcus Aurelius had Stoicism. That was his operating system for dealing with plagues and wars and loss and everything else. So it makes you wonder, what about you? When things get tough, what's your operating system? What personal philosophy guides you through your own battles?